Hi there, this is Stella Chadwick. I'm a registered nutritional therapist and the founder of Brainstorm Health, which is dedicated to helping improve the health of children and young adults with autism. I'm a full member of British Association of Nutritional Therapists, also a senior associate member of the Royal Society of Medicine. I write regularly for the Autism Eye, which is a wonderful British magazine dedicated to all things autism, and I work with many of the autism charities in the UK, giving lectures to parents and practitioners. I'm so excited to be here today and to share with you some wonderful information that I'm hoping you will be inspired with and to be able to put into practice and improve the life of your child and yourself. So if I may share my screen with you with my presentation, I can get started straight away. So this is the Autism Treatment and Recovery Global Summit. I'm so thrilled to be among such amazing people who are part of this summit and who I know are going to help and inspire you and bring lots of sort of action plans together for you. I just wanted to give you my quick disclaimer, which is this presentation is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. Please be very careful when implementing something. Make sure you're working with a professional, either your medical doctor or another practitioner. What's the focus of the talk? The focus of the talk is to look at how the three scourges of our time, the three things that I see as the sort of the underpin of most disease states, most conditions, most disorders, are toxic load pathogens and dysbiosis. And we're going to look at how these three things may be contributing to a response in the body called the cell danger response, which has had a lot of incredible work done around it by Robert Navio and his team. Please look him up and look at all the different things they're doing in order to help our kids. And what we're going to try and link up is to see if all of these things that we know are an issue, the toxic load, the pathogens and dysbiosis, are actually causing this or triggering the cell danger response and therefore triggering the autism symptoms that we see in our kids. So what's the biggest question being asked at the moment? And this is, are the behavioral symptoms of autism caused by treatable metabolic syndrome? And of course, often you'll find that parents and practitioners who've been in this world for many years truly believe that autism is a biochemical, biomedical, metabolic issue, and many children have done very well when it's been discovered what the key problems are. But here, this question is still being asked, and Robert Navio's team are working on trying to find more a pharmaceutical answer for the cell danger response that's being triggered. And as I say, please look into this if you have interest. It is very exciting, hopeful, and very interesting because it helps us understand what to do from our perspective in order to dampen down the cell danger response. So 70 years of research in ASD pretty much has come up with everything that I see in clinic today. We're looking at disturbed gut microbiome, immune dysregulation, mitochondrial problems, methylation problems, neurological problems, cerebral folate deficiency, low glutathione, which is very much more than 80 to 90% of the time. Food sensitivity is very common. Heavy metal toxicity, very, very common. Poor sulfation, autonomic nervous system dysregulation, and pathogenic overload. And what all of these things have in common is that they trigger the cell danger response. And of course, our entire talk is on about how we can influence this response and try and reduce it, which can mean then the body can go back to balance and back into homeostasis. So a little bit on the mitochondria, because if we understand this, then it helps us understand the concept of the cell danger response and how all the things we're going to talk about falls into place. So the mitochondria, we know, I mean, it's incredible how the parents I work with are probably some of the most informed people I've ever come across in my life. And I'm sure many of you will know what the key job of the mitochondria is to produce energy. It's inside the cell, and it produces something called ATP. And that's the most common understanding that we have, and most people will be possibly familiar with this. However, it seems that there's much more to it than that. So the mitochondria, the ATP is produced as energy, but it also has another fundamental job as a warning signal. So you've got energy, ATP being produced inside the cell, and then there seems to be ATP produced outside the cell as sort of a signaling, almost a myokine, to tell other cells what's going on. So if there's some form of danger, it produces lots of these, lots of ATP. And this is what happens: a stressed cell produces lots of ATP. And we'll talk about how that can impact on the entire physiology of any human. And the third job that that ATP has, is as a co-pilot. So we know that every single synapse that's ever been studied has ATP alongside with it. So, and the reason for that is if we look at this synapse and we look at the glutamate that's being released here, glutamate is very important for learning. And so our ancestors running away from the saber-toothed tiger would have learned every single bit of that running away and what happened and all the details. And what happens is that synapse, ATP is also produced, because what it does, it makes you remember it very, very well. So it kind of solidifies the information. So this is our cellular membrane signaling. So that red halo is the outside of the cell. So there appear to be purinergic receptors on these cells, which basically give information out. So some of them are for different things like olfactory reasons or for light. And there seem to be 19 of them that have been cloned. And 7 of those are particularly important significance to me, because they are responsible for making sure that ions like sodium and calcium and all these ion channels work properly. And what the cell danger response is suggesting to us is that if you imagine, it's a normal stress response, but if you imagine that it's persistent, the cell danger response is there as a way of making sure that the body goes back to homeostasis. So it's a natural response, but what sometimes happens is, just like checkpoints at borders, because the CDR has all these checkpoints to make sure that enough healing has been done to go to the next level. People get stuck, and this is the understanding that we need to find a way to unblock this. Now, in the meantime, we know the things that influence the cell danger response or trigger it, and that's the focus of our talk. We want to be able to find ways to stop the triggering or reduce the triggering. Because what will happen is, the ATP being so important for not just life itself, for giving us energy and as a warning signal, and of course at every synapse, it's so important for us to be able to have adequate amounts of ATP. And what happens with the cell danger response is a bit like a water balloon with pinholes in, and lots of ATP is being made, but it's being leaked out. And we need to sort of stop that cycle. So again, this is how the CDR is activated. This is really a very, very good diagram here, which I took from Dr. Navio's presentation. And you can see the key things that are causing this cell danger response. So, genetic mutations, air pollution, flame retardants, metals and pesticides, infections, mast cells, the immune system, the microbiome. So these are the key things. So what Dr. Navio, the way he describes it, is that these seem to be the different mallets are ringing the same cellular bell. So you've got lots of things going and triggering the response, and there's only one response that's happening, which is the cell danger response. So what we're going to do next is we're going to talk about three areas which are significant. So we're looking at the microbiome, we're going to look at pathogens in the immune system, and we're going to look at a very key part for me is how to reduce toxic load, because that is such a significant part of the reason why the response is being triggered. So the microbiome, let's talk about that. A lot of people will be very familiar or have an understanding that the microbiome is hugely important on many levels, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but it's basically made up of about 2 kilograms, which is about 4.5 pounds of microbes. Most of them are bacteria, a few fungi, a few viruses, and a few protozoas. And they are there to help digest food and support our immune system and many other things that we're going to talk about in a minute. But they communicate very closely with the brain, and they do that via a very beautiful nerve called the vagus nerve. It's almost like a superhighway between the brain up in your head and the gut. And in fact, deep inside the tissue of the gut lining, there's an enteric, very thin layer called the enteric nervous system, which has been called the second brain. So there's a massive communication going on, and that can get disrupted. And we're going to talk about how this gets disrupted and how we can put it right. So what does the gut microbiome do? It extracts energy from food. That's its main job, but it also houses 70% of our immune system. It protects the gut from dangerous pathogens. It's very important in synthesizing B vitamins, and often I'll find that the kids I work with are very low in B vitamins and also can't tolerate them very well as a supplement, orally anyway. And so you end up in a sort of vicious cycle. And B vitamins are very important for neurological function, of course, in speech and language. And they also are very important synthesizing vitamin K, which amongst many other things is a very important vitamin for bone synthesis. Microbiome also regulate body weight. They produce hormones and chemicals. There are about 24 hormones and chemicals that are produced to modulate everything from sort of our mood to our appetite. It communicates with the brain, like we mentioned, through the vagus nerve. And there was a theory that not long ago that we are only 10% human cells and 90% bacterial cells, but that actually has been found not to be the case. And the recent research tells us that it's more like a 50-50 balance, which is still huge. But it means that every time you go and have a bowel movement, you become more human, and then it goes back to the 50-50 later on. So what is dysbiosis? This is sort of a definition in the Cell Biology, Microbiology journal, which is perturbations to the structures of complex commensal communities, etc., which can lead to damage. So basically we're saying that the bad guys have taken over the good guys have lost the battle, and that all these amazing functions that the gut microbiome does on a minute-by-minute basis gets disturbed and disrupted. And if we go back to how many of those things we're talking about, you can see how out of balance the body can very easily become. So what are the key contributors? This is what I see very often in my practice. The most fundamental one is antibiotic use. It is, especially if used at a young age, and lots of kids tend to be the ones who have had lots of ear infections and have also mums who had antibiotics, maybe sometimes even IV antibiotics during pregnancy, or they were also the ones who had lots of antibiotics as a child. So antibiotics features hugely in this. I think it's extremely, extremely big part of the picture. Use of NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, antacids, and other pharmaceuticals that can really disturb the gut microbiome. I often see children that I see have had C-section births, and it's been And there's no question in the data that we find that the microbiome that they have is very different to a baby who's born naturally through a birth canal, where they would have had, you know, a mouthful of the mum's bacteria to be seeded, because that's how they get seeded and get their immune system and get their microbiome. So research shows that they are very different. The makeup of the microbiome seems to be very different between the two. Premature birth, I also see often in a dysbiotic gut, stay in ICU, which is intensive care unit or special care unit, that also can contribute. Limited or no breastfeeding. Again, it's about giving not just the colostrum at the beginning, but also the bugs that seed the gut and continue to seed the gut. And pathogenic and toxic load of the parent, poor nutrition of the parent, history of yeast infection, that's quite common in the mum, and history of viral and bacterial infections. And we're going to talk about a little bit about that, what the key ones are in a minute. So this is my analogy of a healthy microbiome. It seems it is absolutely fundamental that we have variety. That seems to be the key to health. It's not about just having lots of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, but it's very much about having a huge variety. There are about 1,000 species of within our microbiome, and we need to feed them all. You know, they all need their own distinct type of food. And the problem we've ended up having is we've ended up with this type of gut because we haven't been feeding our microbiome properly. Now, often what happens is that we have limited so much the food intake that we have. And remember, these gut bugs have been living with us for millions and millions of years, and they've had all these variety of foods given to them. But now we have limited, you know, that 75% of the world's food supply comes from 12 different crops and 5 different animals. And there are over 250,000 plant species in the world, and we only use about 200 of them. So you can see that what we've ended up doing, we've starved the microbiome, and we're going to look at how we're going to restore that. So key steps. And this is so important for all the points that we discussed before that get disturbed. So eat more variety. I know that sounds really fundamental, but every single type of food that you eat feeds a different type of bug in the microbiome. And that's an important thing. So if we want to get that rainforest going on in the gut, then we need to eat a lot more variety. Avoid antibiotics where possible. That is, I know most of us know this, and of course it is not possible always, but please do so. Use it with real caution. Open a window. It's been shown that if you open a window and you let different microbes in, that they actually alter the gut microbiome as well. Eat lots of polyphenols. That is very important. They seem to have a very direct impact on the actual variety of the gut microbiome. We're talking about, phenolic foods like berries and cherries and plums and apples. And the most important one, I think, is olive oil, because it is loaded with polyphenols. And it bypasses, it's so easy to digest, it bypasses the small intestine and then goes and has a huge impact on the microbiome and gives it all some lovely food to grow the gut bugs, the good ones. We need to sort of control inflammation, and oily fish is a very good way to do that. Stick to the smaller fish, they're less toxic. So we're talking about sort of sardines and mackerel and herring and anchovies, and try and avoid the big fish like tuna, shark and halibut, because the longer the fish lives, the more toxicity it builds in its system, and also the bigger it is, the more toxicity it builds. You can use supplements. I like the algae-based supplements, for those who, so vegans and vegetarians can use it as well. And also the safety record for the algae-based the research just seems to be pointing in that direction at the moment. Eat a rainbow of fruit and vegetables. Colors matter. Again, you know, different variety, different colors, each one giving something new to the gut microbiome to grow those lovely bugs. Use herbs and spices. Again, you're giving variety. The most famous spice that's used as an anti-inflammatory, of course, is turmeric with curcumin. You know, turmeric has about 200 different compounds, and curcumin is one of them. It's the most famous one, but it has been shown to be amazing at reducing inflammation. And also always add a pinch of pepper when you're having curcumin, even as a supplement. If it's not in there, add it somehow in there, because a tiny little pinch can increase the bioavailability of curcumin by 2,000%. That's the most recent research showing that. Eat lots of fiber. They're absolutely the stars of the show. They need, we're talking about soluble fiber mainly, which is fruit and vegetables. And they can give lots and lots of beautiful food to the gut microbiome to grow. And you can even supplement that through, the most famous one at the moment is inulin. Please take it easy if you're doing that. Take a tiny sort of pencil tip end to start with and build it up very slowly, because it can cause a lot of sort of gassiness and behaviors actually if you go too fast. But fiber is very, very important. Eat more resistant starch. Again, that's another way of feeding different bugs in the microbiome. Resistant starch is found in things like rice and potatoes. And if you cool down rice and potatoes and any type of starch really, and you eat it either cold or you reheat it, it doesn't seem to matter whether you eat it cold or reheat it, as long as it's been cooled down first, then the resistant starch level is increased by 15 times. So another strategy you can easily implement to help the gut bugs to grow. Include beta-glucans like oats and barley if gluten is tolerated. They're excellent for the gut microbiome as well, to grow different types. Again, you're giving just a different variety. Include seaweed. I love seaweed. It's one of my favorite foods because it's loaded with nutrients and minerals, and it also has fatty acids in it, and it is wonderful food for the microbiome. And so I would use seaweed as regularly as possible, either in food form or sometimes there's supplements you can take, but ideally in food form. Include probiotic foods, which is of course a bit of a no-brainer, but you've got probiotic foods like sauerkraut and beet grass and kefir and all of these different types which can feed the microbiome beautifully. Of course, there's a histamine issue with these things. We're not going to go, this is a broad brush approach, so we're not going to talk about, kids all have different needs, and discuss it with your practitioner. Of course, if histamine rich foods like probiotics don't work very well, then just don't use them. And you have to use commercial probiotics to start with while the gut heals. And then removing pathogens. That is such an important part of our program, because if we don't remove the pathogens, everything else becomes so much harder to achieve, and sometimes not possible, because they're kind of the saboteurs of the healthy gut microbiome, and just of saboteurs of health. So we're going to look at what pathogens are. We've got the common ones that we all know about, which is yeast, bacteria. I see Klebsiella pneumoniae quite often in stool tests. I've been seeing them very often recently. I see lots of viral infections in blood tests, especially the herpes group of viruses. This is a massive issue for the kids. Epstein-Barr, cytomegalo, HHV6, those are the ones that are key. And so that group of viruses need to be really, really checked out to make sure that they're not causing any issues, especially if your child is constipated, they have motility issues, real immune dysregulation, then consider herpes group of viruses as a potential something to check out. It's important not just to test for IgG and IgM, and look for labs that can offer you a little bit more. We use a lab in Germany called Alman Labs to get ELI spots on these, which gives us a much better picture, and you can check for immune cells like CD57, and that gives you, comprehensive analysis will give you a good idea of whether the virus is an issue or not, because sometimes the antibodies don't tell the full story. So there's also parasites and protists. Parasites I don't see very often in stools because they're extremely hard to identify, it seems. We do go with how the child is presenting, and we normally write when we suspect parasites, and we do a protocol regardless of whether we see it in the stool test or not. And often I'll find raised eosinophils in the blood test anyway, which kind of confirms that something's going on there. So this is the most sort of most common viral bacterial pathogens that I've come across in my practice. And each of those will need a slightly different approach in terms of being able to sort out. And I'll talk about the broad type of herbs that we use in a minute. Common pathogens that I see in stool are lots of streptococcus, lots of Klebsiella. The Klebsiella pneumonia is very common. See a lot of yeast. Again, each of those will need a different approach. Discuss it with your practitioner. These are the type of herbs that I really like to use as much as possible. These are the ones that I've always done well with. And I like to alternate, especially for viruses and parasites potentially as well. We like to alternate, especially for viruses, go for 2 or 3 different ones and rotate them so you're not using the same thing all the time. Maybe rotate them every week, but discuss it with your practitioner. So going back to the CDR, this takes us to the next part of our presentation, which is a really key part. And you can see here that how many of the mallets that we talk about that are ringing the cellular bell are to do with the toxicity side of things, so metals and pesticides, flame retardants, air pollution, etc. So we are going to talk about toxic load and how we get it, where it comes from, how we can reduce it from our environment, and different tools that I use in my practice to remove them. And I'm going to talk to you quite a bit about my favorite clinical tool at the moment, which is the Ion Cleanse by AMD, and give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what it's like, how it works, and my clinical data that I can share with you. So how are we exposed to toxins? Our own bodies produce masses and masses of it from just living. So you've got internal metabolites like CO2, urea, and ions, and hormones, and ketones, and broken down cells, and toxins from gut bacteria and yeast and parasite guts. In a dysbiotic gut, that can be a very, very high level of toxicity. And can on its own cause quite a lot of disturbance to the vagus nerve that we talked about, that superhighway between the gut and the brain. Free radicals, so when there's a lot of oxidative stress on the system, which is basically trying to support a system that's gone out of balance, which is often the case with the kids, then you get lots of free radicals, which need lots of antioxidants to sort of quench that fire. And lots of neurotransmitter metabolites, neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, they all get spent. So that they need to, they give off things and they need to be excreted from the body. In our environment, pesticides and herbicides are a huge problem. Pollution, toxic metals, burnt and rancid food, the barbecue food that we have, try and take it easy. The black bits are just not good for us. They're very carcinogenic, so avoid them as much as possible. Food additives and preservatives really don't have any place in our children's diet. Most of us know that. And household chemicals and personal care products, they are so easy to replace nowadays. There's so many different wonderful options. And of course, the medication, sometimes it's necessary to have, but they also rob our body of certain nutrients, which causes a bit of a vicious cycle where you don't have the nutrients to do the job that your body needs to do. So speak to your practitioner or doctor and look at what medication you're taking, what type of nutrients is being impacted significantly, and then try and at least to supplement those at some point in the program. So this is a mercury toxicity model, which I'm only going to show you very briefly. I really like it because it just shows you how, you know, toxicity from mercury in the environment and fish and high fructose corn syrup. It can cause mineral imbalances here. It can cause glutathione, which is our master antioxidant, to be disturbed, and then it can cause oxidative stress and ultimately result in neuronal plasticity and impaired learning. And here, glyphosate and autism chart, which some of you may have already seen. You know, glyphosate is a herbicide, pesticide type thing that's put on a lot of produce that is non-organic. And it has been found to be really detrimental to human health. And I'm going to talk to you about the research that's around that in a minute. I will say that this is a correlation between rise in autism and rise in the use of glyphosate. Now, correlation does not mean causation, we know that, but it's very difficult not to see a bit of a connection here. Now, it's not just a US problem. Often people in Europe and UK think that it's not an issue in the UK and Europe, but it is. Sadly, in November 2017, the EU signed and its commitment to yet many more years of glyphosate use, and the only country that's opting out of it is France. So in the UK, it's used on 2.2 million hectares of arable land, and that's out of about 15 million hectares that we have of arable land in the UK. So, and it's growing. So, impact of glyphosate on health. This is based on the work by Stephanie Seneff. Please look her up. She's amazing. She's a senior research analyst at MIT, and MIT was voted the #1 university in the entire world. And her research has been on trying to find the impact of glyphosate on human health. And the glyphosate makers have always suggested that glyphosate has been designed to disturb the shikimate pathway, which, according to them, is only in existence in plants, and therefore it cannot harm human health. However, what it has been found is that our gut bacteria have a shikimate pathway. Human cells don't, but gut bacteria do. So it decimates the microbiome, and if you go back to all the things that the microbiome does, it means that none of those things get done properly. It also induces excessive bioavailability of glutamate, which is a very excitatory neurotransmitter, and some of our kids are very, very sensitive to glutamate, and so those, you know, they really need to come off anything that has any contact with glyphosate, so organic food, biodynamically grown, and, you know, ensure that glyphosate isn't used in there. Sometimes they use glyphosate, from my understanding, even on organic food when they're storing it, rather than, it says organically grown, but it doesn't say organically stored. So, you know, farmers markets, local markets, go and shop where you know the source of it. It also interferes with the maternal pituitary's manganese-dependent enzyme protein phosphatase, which in turn contributes to low thyroid stimulating hormone. And we know thyroid is implicated in thyroid disorders in the mum are implicated in potentially having a connection with having a greater chance of having a child with autism. It also impairs the mitochondrial function. And, you know, if we go back to the beginning of the presentation, we talk about how important this whole mitochondrial function is in terms of how it impacts the final outcome of ASD, then it's really important for us to reduce this and remove it from our lives. How our bodies detoxify, just a very nice little diagram here. So, very simple diagram, which is showing that there are all these little channels that allow nutrients in and toxins to come out. And the detox works on many, many levels. It is not just our liver. It is the primary and detoxifying organ, but we also have our lungs, especially for the more like gaseous type toxins, skin, our intestines, our bowels, our colon, our kidneys, and each of those will be doing a different type of detoxification. So when you have a high toxic load, every single one of these gets compromised and put under pressure. This is a nice little diagram which shows us how methionine synthase can get disturbed by oxidative stress and also by toxins, and how it can therefore reduce our normal glutathione synthesis, which is very much 80 to 90% of kids I see have low glutathione levels, and they are the ones who have the least sort of ability to detoxify toxins. And what I wanted to show you was this methylation cycle, which many people actually nowadays will have seen at least once, the ones who are involved in this world anyway. And I wanted to compare the methylation cycle to like a Swiss watch, where we have all these different cogs in it, and each of them are beautifully synchronized and need to do their job in order for the next cycle to work properly, and then the next cycle to work properly. And then it just happens so that we end up detoxifying everything well. This is what the methylation cycle is primarily trying to do. See this glutathione down here? This is what it's trying to produce mainly. But it has so many interim jobs here. So if we look at the urea cycle here and look at how that can get affected by lead, or ammonia kids, the ammonia issue is huge. It's in fact, I think, much more of an issue than yeast, and it can have very similar symptoms. High ammonia levels, if you find your child has very high ammonia levels, suspect lead is as a problem. In the BH4 cycle, you can see that aluminium can disturb this. I often see children with extremely high aluminium levels in hair samples and urine samples as well. In this cycle, the THF cycle, we can see that there is lead, aluminium, and mercury disturbing just going into this pathway. Then you've got lead disturbing the pathway in this methionine pathway, and then homocysteine trying to convert into cystathione. So you can see lead is disturbing it there. So toxins at almost every cog in this beautiful Swiss watch of ours that we have can make it go out of whack, which means that everything gets out of balance and we can't process things properly, and we can't detoxify properly, and we can't make enough glutathione. So the liver pathways are in two key phases. You've got, and I'm going to talk to you about them. Phase one is where you're preparing rubbish for collection. So you've got the cytochrome P450 enzyme family helping you there. At the core of every cytochrome P450 molecule is a molecule of iron, and I often see children who are extremely low in iron. I don't think I've ever seen a child really that has a normal ferritin, which is your iron storage levels. There's sort of chemical transformations that are happening. Lots of toxins are being turned into water-soluble toxins, and lots of foods that you need at that point for this phase one to work well are outlined here. So your brassica family are the cauliflower, the broccoli, the cabbage, lots of B vitamin rich foods. Remember, our kids are not producing a huge amount in their gut if they have gut dysbiosis. Lots of vitamin C, glutathione, branched chain amino acids are valine, leucine, and isoleucine. And these are really important for muscle mass. So if your child has poor muscle tone, making sure that they have lots of branched chain amino acids is important. And lots of flavonoids and phospholipids and zinc and copper and magnesium. In the intermediary phase, it's almost like you've got your rubbish, you've put them outside, and they're sort of waiting for the bin men to come and collect it. And this is the holding phase, so lots of things become very smelly, if you like, if you can continue using the bin analogy. and so which become more toxic. So imagine if you had a strike by your bin men and the bins were all left outside for 2 weeks and started getting very smelly. And these are the free radicals that are being produced in our body, all the sort of smelly, horrible stuff. So if we don't have the right nutrients to push through the first phase and the second phase, then you can see that we can get into trouble and have lots of oxidative stress, free radicals. And these are the beneficial nutrients. I won't reel them out, you can read them here. The phase 2 is where there's a lot of conjugation happens. So basically you've got all these lovely conjugates like glutathione and sulfur, and they hold hands, if you like, with the toxin, and they help it come out of the body. And imagine if you don't have enough glutathione in your system, which, remember, more than 80 to 90% of kids don't, then lots of things that need holding hand to be removed don't get to have their hand held, and they stay in the system. And these are the nutrients for phase 2, which are very, very helpful. And this is a pathway that I like to show, because if you look at the glutathione conjugates, these are the things, the nasties that end up staying in your system if you don't have enough glutathione, if you don't have enough sulfur. This is why Epsom salt baths are so brilliant, because they help remove a lot of the toxins from here. And then you can look at all the others as well. The methylation cycle, you can see, helps remove all of this. And I'll let you to look at that in detail later. Top 10 foods for detox. These are my favorites. Each of those contributes to the overall detox process from beginning to end. And I would urge you to make sure you have these as regularly as possible. Top measures in reducing input. Eat organic produce. Glyphosate is not good for us. Pesticides, herbicides are not good for us. And we need to eat organically, with organically produced and stored foods. Local farmers markets are the best. There's so many now, and you can go online and find one close to you. Box schemes, there are lots of organic box schemes all over the country, both in the US, I believe, and the UK and Europe. Use them as much as possible. It's just a different way of ordering your food, and you get used to it. Seek natural brands of toiletries and cosmetics, really important. Remember, our skin is one of our detox organs, and we don't want to pollute it and put barriers on it. Use biodegradable products wherever possible. Food additives and colors are totally unnecessary, need to come out immediately out of children's diets, especially things like MSG. Don't burn plastics, they off-gas huge amount of toxins. Avoid all chemicals that have chlorine in their name, especially with preservatives, herbicides, and insecticides. And air fresheners, anything that basically smells, that isn't an essential oil, is going up your nose, and it is a VOC, which is a volatile organic compound, and causing toxicity in the body. Remove those as much, immediately. This is such a simple thing that you can do and reduce the load on the body. Make sure we have clean water. Very important that we have clean water. So check your water, make sure it's not got toxins in it, and install a filter or use some form of filtration to help with clean water. The last two are a little bit controversial. Cordless phones can emit a lot of nasties, and we try and avoid them because they're so unnecessary. Most people don't use house phones anymore anyway, and if you do, just have one that's plugged in like a proper old-fashioned wire into the wall. Do your research on this. There is evidence to show that this is a problem, and an unnecessary one, and it's so easy to remedy. Wi-Fi is not so easy to remedy because we're all hugely dependent on it. But make sure, steps you can take is to make sure you don't have a router near your child's bedroom or where anyone spends a huge amount of time. Even if it's there on the first floor and the router is underneath in the lounge or or an area where it's beneath the bedroom of your child, move the location of it, because that can have an impact. And ideally you want to switch off Wi-Fi at night time, and give the body a rest, because I was at a conference a couple of months ago, and I heard from a medical doctor talking about her passion, which was the impact of Wi-Fi on health and the brain, and it was quite compelling. So please do what you can. So these are my top detoxification support strategies. I love castor oil packs. They are a wonderful way to help release toxins from the liver and improve bile flow. This is a simple thing to do. You get a cloth, you pour castor oil all over it, and you put it on a child around the gallbladder and liver, which is below the right breastbone, and then you put some form of heat on it, like a heat pad or a hot water bottle. You start with 10 minutes and you build it up very slowly to about 30 minutes, and you do 3 consecutive days on and three days off. And this is brilliant for children who have constipation. It really relieves that. Obviously removing toxic load, improving bile flow, but also very good for kids who have a lot of anxiety. It seems to really help. Occasionally there's a child who has an allergic response to castor oil, so please make sure, if that's very rare, but if it happens, you obviously stop using it. But most of the time it's been a brilliant tool. Make sure that if the child can't have, or they have sensory issues around the castor oil pack, or it's just too much of yet another thing to add into the program, then just rub some castor oil on the liver and gallbladder area and apply heat to it at bedtime, and do this fairly regularly on a daily basis, and you should see results within a couple of weeks. Epsom salt baths, which we are all very familiar with, they are a wonderful way of giving the body sulfur, which is one of the conjugates we need to excrete a lot of toxins. Our kids tend to be low in that, and of course lots of magnesium, which is very calming and generally low in the population. Iodine painting is another lovely thing that I do, which is I use Lugol's iodine, 2-3 drops on the skin. And we have a way of monitoring how much you need. You get a bit of a dark brown stain, and it does stain very badly, so make sure you don't get it on any clothes. Once you've put it on, you've rubbed it in, there's like a brown patch, and you wait to see how long it takes for that brown patch to disappear. And that becomes your dosing schedule. If it takes 1 day, then you do it daily. If it takes 3 days, then you do it every 3rd day. And at the beginning of the program, this is how we like to do it. Of course, you can use seaweed and supplements as well. Infrared saunas are used by some. I do use it sometimes. I have a big question mark on infrared saunas for me. I'm not trying to suggest that they're not helpful, but I like the ones that are heated by water pipes, and that's the only one we recommend if people want to use infrared saunas, and not ones where they have wires and electricity going through it. We've just found out that there's been suggestions and that they can emit things if they are not warmed with water pipes. So that's what we recommend. Our favorite tool, however, is the Ion Cleanse by MD, which has had consistently excellent results, both clinically and research-wise, and it has incredible safety record, and we're going to talk about that now. So what is the Ion Cleanse by MD? This is what it looks like. It is a foot bath. Your child puts their feet in, and there's the green pad that you see on the floor. That is the control mechanism for the Ion Cleanse, and it has a lead that goes into the water and is connected to a steel plate called an array, and it essentially works by splitting the water molecule. So it splits the H2O into hydrogen, which is positively charged, and 2 oxides, so 2 oxygen molecules, an oxide which is negatively charged. And these have a negative, the opposite, magnetic pull in the body, and they pull the toxins out into the water. Now, we're going to talk about how it works in a minute as well in more detail, but just to say in terms of how I became aware of it was through patients about 16, 17 months ago, and I was I became very interested because I was getting some very good feedback, and I actually bought my own system. And we had one of my children particularly had some health issues at the time, and it was quite amazing, and I loved it, and I sort of fell in love with it. I looked at their research, I checked out the company. We are not, I've been in the autism world for many years, and we have never ever considered working with or having a product that we promote, or and this is different. It has been an excellent tool in my practice, and we love it, and we want as many people to hear about it and use it as possible. So the questions that I had at the beginning was, how safe is this? Because you're mixing water and electricity. And it was pretty impressive to see that they had a medical grade power supply, so medical grade technology. They have an external power supply, so even if the box fell into the water, nothing would happen, no one would get hurt, whereas that's not the case with other machines. Has a perfect safety record, A+ rating. The company AMD have been in business since 2002. And most importantly, and this was a clincher for me, was that they offer a 60-day, 100% money-back guarantee, which they honor. They don't get many returns, but when they do, it is returned. The money is returned immediately. And this is fantastic. It was really important to me that my patients didn't purchase something that didn't work for them, and they had the opportunity to almost trial it for that period. It also has a 3-year warranty and a free lifetime service and support. And the service and support team at AMD are exceptional. They also have an excellent Facebook group called Ion Cleanse by AMD for ASD, which I urge you to visit, because there you will find nearly 7,000 parents who are either using the machine or looking to use it. So this is the Ion Cleanse by AMD before and after photo. Now, I was one of those skeptics who read, when I was doing my research 16, 17 months ago, that the watercolor changes whether you have your feet in the water or not. And in fact, I remember that was one of my first questions that I asked. And of course, the watercolor does change, because even if you put nothing in there, they would change. And it would also change if you put a carrot in there or your feet in there, because what it does, it allows the chemical reactivity that's happening is to whatever's in the water. So every water will have a different chemicals in it. Feet will have different things on it. So all the water looks different from person to person. When you find that out when you do it as a family, and you see that each of you are excreting something different. So there's partly some of the detox is happening through the feet, but the majority of the detox, through all the research that AMD have done, is showing that it's coming out through all the other organs, through the liver and kidneys and skin. They are going to be producing some wonderful data for everyone to take a look at. In the meantime, one of the important things that I looked at was, what actually happens. I wanted to understand the technology, and the key thing that happens is that the Ion Cleanse triggers a relaxation response. And this, for me as a clinician, I understood this very quickly and very well, because I'm going to take you to another slide in a minute and bring you back to this, because I want to show you what the autonomic nervous system looks like. We have two parts to our autonomic nervous system, which is the sympathetic response, which is S for stress, if you like, which responds, it's a fight or flight response. You're either running away from the saber-toothed tiger or you're fighting it. That is a primitive response, which is in us all the time. And then there's the parasympathetic response, which is rest and digest, and it's a response of sort of a peaceful response, so P for peace. And if we look at the different systems in our body, in the sympathetic mode, which is primarily where our children are almost all the time, your eyes, the pupils dilate, the heart's pumping, the lungs pumping, the stomach inhibits digestion. Last thing you need is to digest your food if you're running away from the saber-toothed tiger. your liver's releasing lots of glucose, so you have energy to run. Your kidneys are stimulating epinephrine and norepinephrine, which is adrenaline and noradrenaline. And your intestines inhibit peristalsis and secretion of enzymes, and your bladder releases. And I would say that this is pretty much the state that our kids in, and you cannot be in that state and be in the parasympathetic mode as well. Parasympathetic is where you are calm, relax, you rest, digest, repair, and detoxify. And so if we go back to how important that triggering of the relaxation response is, we often find kids when they put their feet in the water, in a few minutes they look relaxed. If they can tell us how relaxed they are. They love the foot baths, even the ones that you think are not going to get their feet in there. In almost all cases they do, because they really enjoy it. It makes them feel good. It's non-invasive, a huge plus for me. It has 100% safety record. Compliance is high. I don't need to tell you that every protocol success is based on actually being able to do it consistently. And this has been close to 100% compliance. You can use it with other protocols. I talked about the toxins being excreted in the water, which is a small part of the release, and there is evidence to show that it continues being released through the other detoxification organs. We talked about how it splits the water molecules to create ions, and most importantly is that it works. It is a great tool. I have seen more than 150 of my patients are now using the Ion Cleanse by AMD, and I'm kind of blown away every day by how impressive the results have been. And of course, if you remember, the improving of the cell membrane signaling is an important part of why healing happens. And if we have these channels on the membranes of the cell that may have toxins on them and they don't work very well, once you start removing that toxicity, then you can get the cells to work properly, and you start going towards trying to switch off the cell danger response and calm the body down so it can go back to homeostasis. So the research part of it was huge for me, because by the time I became aware of the Ion Cleanse by AMD, they had already done 2 research studies along with the Thinking Mums Revolution. The first one was in January to May 2015, 4-month study, 24 children aged between 2 and 13, and the Ion Cleanse was used every other day for at least 15 minutes, up to 30 minutes. And the ATEC score was used to measure outcome. And ATEC score is a kind of a questionnaire tool that was set up by the Autism Research Institute, by Dr. Rimland and Edelson. And it's a way of measuring, for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's a way of measuring the level of autism and difficulties that a person has. So if you score under 10, you're fairly neurotypical. If you score between 10 and 50, you are sort of mild to mild. 50 to 100, you'd be moderate, and 100 plus, you would be severe. So using the Ion Cleanse, these children had an ATEC score drop at the end of 4 months on average of 35%. That is incredible. I mean, just no other interventions that we've come across. There are very few that can achieve this type of result in such a short space of time, using something that is so simple and easy to do, and you're not adding anything to the body. That is the beauty of it. And then another, this is the chart showing you the actual gradual decline. In every month the ATEC scores were taken, and this shows you how it dropped gradually over time. And then another study was done a few months later, again, another 4-month study, same people, Thinking Mum Revolution with AMD. And this is a 4-month study with 27 children with autism aged between 4 and 19. So the age group was shifted upwards. And this time the schedule for the Ion Cleanse was 3 days on and 1 day off for at least 15 minutes. And the schedule was changed because of the wonderful feedback from those using it. we found that in many cases, the more they did, the better the outcome was for their child in terms of symptoms. So the ATEC was used as a measure of outcome again, and the reduction on this trial was an average drop of 55%, which is unbelievable, really. What was amazing was that those aged between 13 and 19 had a reduction of 64%. So if you imagine a child who has a ATEC score of 100, and so that would be classified as severe, if in 4 months' time that ATEC score drops to 36, which is deemed as towards the low end of moderate, low. And that is, to me, unbelievable that we can achieve this with such an easy intervention. Now, I wanted to, again, share with you the drops that were measured over a 4-month period on a monthly basis. And then I wanted to show you a case study of mine, a child called Alison, who's 6, and she presented with all of these issues: hand flapping, pale complexion, temper tantrums, crying and laughing for no reason, frequent urination, hyperactivity, congestion of the nose and lots of runny nose, hives and eczema, lots of immune issues, recurring infections, learning difficulties, poor focus, biting herself and others, and poor sleep, would wake up lots, really severe constipation, and non-verbal. And this was the hair metals test that we did before we started the ion cleanse, at which point we had already done some work on the diet, and she had sort of plateaued, hadn't really, we'd reached a point where we needed something new. And when we did this, we found that she had very high aluminium levels, almost 7 times the absolute maximum level. And lots of other things like thallium and thorium and titanium, etc., and mercury. And so her total representation index was massively high. And we used the ion cleanse for 12 months. The schedule was moved gradually towards 3 days on, 1 day off. It was a gradual process. And after 12 months, this is the hair test we did for her. So you can see that, I was particularly blown away by the aluminium level dropping from more than 60 down to 1.4. And all the other measures have gone down to normal. Antimony is a funny one, and it sort of almost tells us that we have to always be mindful. We have so much. Antimony is found largely in fire retardant materials like new carpets, new furniture, new bedding, new pajamas, new car, that kind of thing. And I would say you need to be very careful. And the ion cleanse would be amazing, because eventually that would come down to, and once we identify environmental inputs and reduce that, the outcome of this would be even better. So this is the comparison between the two. So you can see here the aluminium was 61 and it's gone down to 1.4. And it's, the thorium was 0.054 and it's gone down to 0.001, virtually negligible, virtually non-existent. So, but what did it mean in terms of how she was? That's the most important thing, of course. This is Alison after 12 months, much improved complexion. If you remember the cytochrome P450 enzymes, they have an iron molecule at their core. And if you are lifting the toxicity, you're allowing the body to take, to have more cytochrome P450 enzymes. And I believe that's what's helped the complexion, because there's more iron there for the cytochrome P450s to work better. Much calmer with only the occasional temper tantrum, stopped crying and laughing for no reason, stopped frequent urination, a much better immune system with fewer infections. And one of the interesting things was that she would get ill, but she wouldn't have a fever. But she managed to get a fever after using the ion cleanse. And then it was a real shift in her system, because fevers are there as a way of like cleaning you out and killing viruses. And that was significant for us. Improved focus and learning, stopped biting self and others, no more night waking, formed stools, very important. She was very, very constipated. This is a child who went every 3-4 days. and now she had 1 to 2 regular bowel movements, perfectly formed with good colour that's showing proper detox is happening, and developed language, which was the wish of the mum more than above and beyond everything, as it is for many parents, from being non-verbal. So I wanted to thank you for listening to me. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you'd like to find out more about Brainstorm Health, please look us up on brainstormhealth.co.uk. We have a clinic in London at number 10 Harley Street. We see both national and international patients. So if you want to contact us for an appointment, please do so. We are also the distributors of the Ion Cleanse by MD. And if you live in the UK and Europe and you wanted to make a purchase, or you wanted to find out more information about it, please do let me know. Thank you again for listening, and I hope that some of these have been of help to you and that you can walk away with some actionable things to do, and I wish you all the best.